Right now I'm going to talk about the current policy situation in Mexico and what is done by Mexico and the US to combat drug cartels. As of 2013, it is estimated that 90% of all cocaine travels through Mexico to eventually reach the United States, and roughly 75% of all marijuana also travels through Mexico to reach the United States. In 2007, President George Bush, along with Mexican President Felipe Calderón, signed the Meridad Initiative, intended to combat drug cartels in Mexico. In 2008, when Obama took office, he continued to further relations with Mexico and continued to make progress with this initiative. So what is the Meridad Initiative? The Meridad Initiative is a U.S. Congress-authorized allocation of $1.6 billion in funding. These funds are meant to be spent on Mexico and other Central American countries. It is a 3-year plan with several different installments being unveiled each year. For example, during the first year of this initiative, $465 million will be spent, $400 for Mexico and $65 million for all the other Central American countries. The rest of this money will be allocated over the next 2 years. So how is this money being spent? Much of it is being spent on inspection equipment. Equipment such as gamma ray scanners, X-ray vans, and canine units for Mexican and Central American authorities. It is also being spent on technology improvements. These improvements include secure telecommunication systems that collect criminal information in Mexico, as well as technical advice and training to strengthen the institutions of justice, along with case management software to track investigations. Also, a lot is being spent on military equipment. More specifically, 11 Black Hawk helicopters have been given to Mexican authorities. And finally, is being spent on training. Community action programs have been put forth in Central American countries to implement anti-gang measures and to expand the reach of these measures. So what is the goal of this initiative? The goal is to break up the stranglehold that organized crime has in Mexico, and to do this through gaining intelligence on trafficking and trafficking routes of the drug traffickers in Mexico and other Central American countries. So is it working? The answer is yes and no. In 2013, there was a record number of arrests. According to a congressional testimony, many of the Mexican government's high-profile arrests or killings of top-level drug lords resulted from bilateral intelligence and operational cooperation. So now the United States and Mexico are cooperating. What is good about the current policy? Now separate nations are sharing intelligence and resources and manpower, which all makes for a more effective pursuit of illegal drug traffickers. What is bad about the current policy? What is bad is that it is only a reactionary policy. It does not target the source of the drug problem in America. It only targets the illicit drug trafficking trade and not the real root of the drug problem. So some new techniques used to combat illegal drug trade are drones. Drones are used to track the trafficking routes, to keep tabs on high-value targets, keep tabs on manufacturing centers, and just used generally in any capacity that they can view things from the air. Another technique, which I will show in a short clip next, is legalized vigilantism.
Gomez was a victim of the Knights Templar, a ruthless drug cartel in Mexico's Michoacan state. He was forced to pay ever-increasing protection money for the cattle he raised and the limes he grew. But when the cartel tried to take his land, he knew it was time to leave.
Este rancho me gusta, me lo vendes o me lo vende la viuda.
They would tell us, you either sell it to me or I will buy it from your widow, he says. He wasn't the only one living in fear.
Nos mataron gente.
They killed our people, they raped our young women, and they did as they pleased, he says.
Ándale, que estén bien. Y aquí estamos.
Hipólito Mora was among the first to fight back. The 58-year-old farmer led a self-proclaimed group of vigilantes that forced the drug cartel out of their town last April.
De alguna forma me he salido de la ley.
I know I'm operating outside of the law, he says, but I'm doing it for my family just like every other man in this movement. His rebellion became an inspiration for others in the area. Since early January, several other towns have taken up arms and confronted drug traffickers in violent clashes. The cartel struck back, torching vehicles and businesses and killing several people. In the end, more than a dozen towns managed to drive away the criminal organization that had terrorized the region for years. This is the checkpoint at the edge of the town of La Huerta. It's just like many others in towns throughout the region, where vigilante groups control access, letting townspeople in and out, while hoping to keep the cartels from getting back in. They are young and old, farmers and laborers, and even some migrants who have returned from the United States to reclaim what used to belong to their families. This man, who wants to be called Juan, used to live in North Carolina.
In the last couple of months, there's been a lot of violence, and we haven't been able to make any money to support our families, and we all gotta eat. And if we ain't working, we can't eat, so it was something that had to be done.
The Mexican government has sent in thousands of soldiers and federal police to help patrol and control the area. So what's going to happen if the army decides to leave?
Well, we hope they don't leave. We hope they stay here to back us up.
Their fight has given hope to Gomez that life can go back to normal. He knows that there are no guarantees the cartel won't try to come back, but this time, he says, he and the vigilantes won't give up.
So as the video showed, vigilantism is supported in certain instances by the Mexican government. Citizens are able to take up arms and defend their area under certain circumstances. So in regards to new policy, one of the most prevailing ideas by scholars and academics is legalization. When you make the drug trade illegal, you drive the sale of drugs underground. The demand for drugs is still there. However, people have to get their drugs by illegal means, and thus this gives the cartels and other organized crime a monopoly over the sale of drugs. If you were to regulate it in some formal manner, you would essentially put the cartels out of business, and therefore eliminate a lot of the death and violence surrounding the drug trade today.
So what's the answer? I spoke to one man who spent 10 years trying to stop drugs entering the U.S. from Mexico. Terry Nelson was a border agent in the Texas city of El Paso. When he retired, he joined the group LEAP, or Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. I asked him why he no longer thinks enforcement is the way of tackling the drug trade.
Marijuana is higher THC now than it was in the beginning, and as well as cocaine is purer, cheaper, and more of it than it was 30 years ago when I first started working here. So that, to me, is a sign of failure. The policy's not working, because if it were working, then we would be catching less and less drugs, and we would have less and less drug use in America, which we all know is not the case.
But I mean, everyone can see that, though. But I mean,
well, you would think everyone could see it, but we at LEAP, of course, we think we see it, and we're calling for a system of regulation and control of narcotics, is who can buy them and who can sell them, to stop drug gangs from selling them to kids in school grounds and stuff, and then quit treating our drug problem as a criminal problem and treat it as a social ill and a medical ill instead of a criminal problem. And by doing that, we can take about 80% of the crime and violence out of the drug trade and basically put the cartels out of business.
what would some of your former colleagues, though, say? What did your colleagues say when you pointed this out when you were in law enforcement, that, hang on, maybe this isn't working, maybe we should talk about this a bit more creatively or honestly?
Well, the one thing that sticks out in my mind was the guy from D.C. told me that, Agent Nelson, you don't make policy, you carry it out, which was a true statement. I was paid by the government to carry out their policy, not paid to implement, to make the policy. So he was right. Now I'm trying to change that policy.
But the culture of the crackdown of punishment, we still hear that. I mean, it's all spoken of. Hillary Clinton, for example, has recently said that we're part of this problem, but her solution was to say, so we're going to give Mexico 4 more Black Hawks, helicopters. I mean, is that the way forward? That's still the crackdown, isn't it?
Well, if you've lived around here as long as I have, this is not the first time we've given Mexico helicopters. This will be the first time we've given them Black Hawk helicopters, and I'm sure Sikorsky really appreciates business. But we gave them Huey helicopters 20 some odd years ago, many of them, and within a few years they were just cannibalized for parts and they had very few of them left running. It was a waste of our money, time, and effort, and I'm afraid it's the same thing now. We must recognize that the policy we've been using isn't working, and so let's try something different. Let's try a new policy, or at least modify the policy, and try to get something that works instead of continuing for another 40 years what hasn't worked in the last 40 years.
How many people...
So as the video showed, legalization, or at least decriminalization, of illicit drugs would likely remove a lot of the influence the cartel currently has in the illicit drug trade, thus eliminating a lot of the unnecessary death and violence the cartel exerts over thousands of people. No policy is perfect, and the legalization or decriminalization of drugs would likely create a whole host of problems. However, much of the unnecessary death would be avoided if this policy were to be implemented.